Karen thought she had finally found happiness with Richard, the man who seemed like the perfect husband and stepfather, but when her daughter Emily began to drift away, Karen uncovered a forbidden relationship that would end in a gruesome and unforgettable murder. Karen had always believed in second chances. After years of raising her daughter Emily on her own, she thought she finally found someone who could bring stability and love back into their lives. Richard entered their world like a calm breeze after a storm. He was well liked in the neighborhood, a skilled mechanic who worked hard and seemed genuinely devoted to both Karen and her daughter. When he proposed, Karen felt relief more than excitement, as if she could finally rest knowing someone else would help carry the weight of responsibility. Friends congratulated her, saying she deserved happiness after everything she had endured. From the outside, they looked like the perfect blended family. Richard would mow the lawn on weekends while Karen prepared lunch, and Emily would sit outside reading, occasionally laughing at his jokes. Neighbors often waved, commenting on how wholesome the family seemed. Karen was proud that Emily finally had a father figure who appeared dependable. For a long time, she had worried her daughter might grow up resenting the absence of her biological father, who had walked away when Emily was just a toddler. Richard filled that gap effortlessly, or so Karen thought. Richard had a natural charm that made people trust him. He wasn't overly flashy or loud, but he carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who belonged. He often told Karen how lucky he was to have found her, praising her for raising such a smart, beautiful daughter. He made Emily feel included, attending her school events, cheering from the sidelines at her soccer games, and encouraging her when she doubted herself. Karen would watch from the stands, touched by how invested he seemed in Emily's happiness. At family dinners, Richard would ask Emily about her day before even speaking to Karen, and she would beam under his attention. To Karen, this looked like the bond of a caring stepfather and daughter. The first months after the wedding felt like the start of a new life. They took family trips together, nothing extravagant, just drives to nearby lakes, hikes through the woods, or visits to diners where Richard insisted on ordering dessert for Emily no matter what. He showered her with small acts of kindness, like slipping her an extra $5 for lunch at school, or fixing her bike before she even asked. Karen interpreted these actions as a sign of his generosity. She thought he was simply trying to make up for the years Emily had grown up without a male role model. Emily, at 16, was at a sensitive age caught between childhood and womanhood. She was bright but sometimes withdrawn, shy around strangers but affectionate at home. Richard had a way of drawing her out, coaxing her into conversations when she seemed closed off. He praised her art projects, hung her drawings on the fridge, and told Karen that Emily reminded him of someone destined for great things. Karen often felt gratitude that Emily had someone who cared for her so deeply, someone who could offer what she thought was healthy guidance. But even as Karen settled into this new rhythm, there were fleeting moments when she noticed something in Richard's behavior that felt slightly off. Nothing alarming enough to raise suspicion, just a flicker of something she brushed aside. His compliments toward Emily were unusually detailed, sometimes more focused than a typical stepfather's remarks should have been. He commented on her appearance in ways that seemed a little too observant, but Karen convinced herself it was harmless. After all, Richard had never given her any real reason to doubt him. At night, as Karen drifted to sleep beside her new husband, she would imagine a future where Emily thrived in school, where Richard continued to be a supportive father figure, and where she finally had the family she once believed impossible. For Karen, those early days were filled with hope, comfort, and a sense that she had rebuilt a life worth living. She could not have known then that the man she had welcomed into her home would soon shatter the very foundation of their world. Karen's sense of security began to slip almost imperceptibly. It wasn't one single moment that changed things, but rather a collection of small details that, when added together, unsettled her. Richard seemed to be everywhere Emily was. If Emily sat in the living room scrolling through her phone, Richard would casually join her, sometimes staying until late at night, even after Karen had gone to bed. He bought Emily new clothes, shoes, and gadgets without ever consulting Karen, brushing it off with a smile when she questioned him. "She deserves nice things," he would say, and though the words sounded harmless, there was an undertone Karen couldn't quite place. Emily's behavior also shifted in ways that alarmed her mother. The open, chatty teenager who used to share details about school and friendships became distant. She locked her phone more often, kept her bedroom door closed, and avoided eye contact during dinner conversations. When Karen asked her if something was wrong, Emily would shrug or give vague answers. Karen told herself this was normal for a teenager, that Emily was simply growing up and craving independence. But deep down, she felt an invisible wall had been built between them, one she didn't know how to break down. There were moments that sharpened Karen's unease. Once, she returned home earlier than expected from the grocery store, and found Richard and Emily sitting unusually close on the couch. They sprang apart when she entered, both acting as though nothing was unusual. Another time, Karen overheard Richard complimenting Emily in a way that lingered in her mind. He told her she was blossoming beautifully, words that echoed in Karen's thoughts long after they had been spoken. She laughed nervously in the moment, convincing herself it was an awkward choice of words rather than something sinister. At night, Karen lay awake, replaying these instances, telling herself she was overthinking. Richard had been nothing but reliable since entering their lives, and Emily seemed comfortable with him. It was easier to believe that she was imagining things than to confront the terrifying possibility that something darker might be unfolding in her home. Still, the unease grew heavier, pressing down on her chest like a weight she could not lift. Richard's attentiveness only intensified. He insisted on driving Emily to school, even on mornings when Karen was available. He lingered in her room under the pretense of helping with homework or fixing something. Karen occasionally caught him watching Emily with a look she couldn't quite define, something more intense than fatherly pride. Each time, she would dismiss the thought almost instantly, ashamed of herself for even entertaining such suspicions. The shift in her daughter's demeanor was the most painful part. Emily no longer confided in her mother, instead pulling closer to Richard. If Karen suggested a mother-daughter outing, Emily declined, saying she already had plans with her stepfather. It felt as if Karen was being replaced. Her role as protector quietly eroded, while she stood helpless on the sidelines. Though the house remained outwardly calm, Karen felt a storm building just beneath the surface. She couldn't put her finger on it, but the harmony she once believed in was unraveling. The warmth of their blended family was fading, replaced by an atmosphere of secrecy that left her anxious and restless. Each day, she convinced herself that she was overreacting, that these were just the growing pains of a new marriage, yet something in her gut whispered otherwise. A low warning she tried desperately to silence. One quiet evening, Karen sat down at the family computer to send an email. Richard had taken extra shifts at the garage, and Emily was upstairs in her room. As she clicked through the browser, she noticed a hidden folder tucked away among random files. At first, she assumed it belonged to Emily, perhaps a stash of teenage photos or music, but curiosity gnawed at her, and she opened it. What she found froze her in place. Inside were dozens of messages exchanged between Richard and Emily, written in tones no parent should ever see between a stepfather and daughter. They were filled with emotional confessions, words dripping with affection that crossed every boundary of what was appropriate. Karen's hands trembled as she scrolled through them. Some messages were innocent enough on the surface, talking about Emily's school day or her worries about friends. But beneath them, the language shifted, growing darker, more intimate. Richard called Emily special, saying she understood him in ways no one else could. He told her she was beautiful, not just as a daughter but as something more. Emily's replies revealed a confused and vulnerable teenager, manipulated into believing this attention was love rather than exploitation. The walls of Karen's world seemed to collapse in that moment. The man she had married, the man she trusted with her family's future, had betrayed her in the most unforgivable way. Her stomach turned as she read line after line, her heart pounding with rage, fear, and disbelief. She clicked out of the folder, shut the computer, and sat in the silence of the living room, her breath shallow as if the air itself had thickened. Every memory of Richard's attention toward Emily replayed in her mind, now seen in a horrifying new light. The gifts, the long conversations, the way Emily had grown distant, none of it was innocent. Karen felt sick when she realized how carefully Richard had crafted his deception. To outsiders, he appeared the doting stepfather. To Emily, he became a figure of trust who slowly blurred boundaries until she no longer recognized the manipulation. And to Karen, he had presented the mask of a loyal husband, all while weaving his obsession in the shadows. In the days that followed, Karen became more watchful. She noticed how Emily flinched when Richard entered her room, only to quickly cover it with a forced smile. She caught the nervous glances Emily cast in her stepfather's direction during dinner, as if waiting for his approval before speaking. The signs were there all along, but Karen had been too willing to believe in the illusion of a happy family. Alone in the kitchen one night, she opened the folder again, rereading the words, burning them into her memory. The betrayal cut deeper with every sentence. She wanted to protect her daughter, to confront Richard and tear away the mask he wore so easily, but fear anchored her. Richard had always been calm, almost too calm, and she couldn't predict how he would react once exposed. For the first time, she felt unsafe in her own home, surrounded by walls that now felt like a trap. Karen knew she couldn't stay silent. The secret she uncovered was too dangerous, too poisonous to ignore. But what she didn't realize was how close her discovery had already pushed their fragile family to the edge of violence. Karen couldn't hold the secret inside for long. The weight of what she had uncovered gnawed at her every waking moment. Nights were sleepless, her mind replaying the words she had read on the screen, twisting her stomach into knots. When Richard came home from work, she studied him closely, searching for cracks in his carefully constructed façade. He still acted like the devoted husband and stepfather, but now, every smile looked false, every gesture calculated. Emily avoided her mother's gaze, retreating further into silence, as though she carried a shame too heavy to speak aloud. Karen knew the confrontation was inevitable. It happened one evening after dinner. Karen had spent the day rehearsing what she would say, but when the moment arrived, her emotions surged past the point of control. She demanded answers, her voice sharp and trembling, accusing Richard of betraying her trust and corrupting her daughter. For a brief second, Richard's mask remained intact. He laughed it off, dismissing her accusations as paranoia. But when Karen revealed that she had seen the messages, the charm drained from his face. His eyes hardened, and for the first time since she had known him, she saw something menacing lurking behind them. Emily, seated at the table, froze. She looked from her mother to Richard, tears filling her eyes. The silence stretched until Emily finally broke, her voice cracking as she admitted the truth. The confession seemed to slice through the air, leaving the room heavy and suffocating. Karen's worst fears were no longer suspicions, they were reality. Richard's composure crumbled in an instant. His tone shifted from denial to fury, his voice rising as he accused Karen of trying to destroy the family. He insisted that no one would ever understand the bond he shared with Emily, as though his obsession was something noble rather than twisted. Karen stood her ground, rage coursing through her veins. But beneath it all, she felt a flicker of fear. His eyes burned with a desperation she had never seen before, a man cornered and dangerous. Emily sobbed uncontrollably, caught between the two people she depended on most. Karen tried to comfort her, but Richard's looming presence kept the girl rooted in fear. He spoke with a disturbing conviction, telling Emily that her mother wanted to take everything away from them, that she couldn't be trusted. The manipulation was laid bare, no longer hidden behind gifts and kind words, but twisted into threats and emotional chains. The confrontation stretched late into the night, the house echoing with raised voices and heavy silences. By the end, nothing was resolved. Richard stormed out, slamming the door so hard the walls shook. Emily clung to her mother, but Karen could feel how deeply the man had embedded himself into her daughter's mind. The damage was already done. When the house finally grew quiet, Karen sat in the darkness, her arms wrapped around Emily, her mind racing. She knew she had to act quickly. Leaving Richard was no longer just a choice, it was a matter of survival. She silently vowed to protect her daughter at all costs, unaware that Richard, consumed by rage and obsession, was already spiraling toward a decision that would end in bloodshed. Karen had always prided herself on being strong, but in the days after the confrontation, her strength was tested in ways she had never imagined. She moved through the house cautiously, like a visitor in her own home. Every sound made her heart race. Every glance from Richard left her unsettled. He acted as though nothing had happened, carrying on with his routines, but his silence was heavy, charged with something dangerous. He avoided direct arguments, yet Karen could feel his anger simmering just beneath the surface. Waiting for the right moment to erupt, she began quietly preparing a way out. During her lunch breaks at work, she met with a lawyer to discuss divorce. She looked up rental properties, tucked away money, and gathered important documents. She never told Richard about these steps, knowing his temper was unpredictable. At night, when Emily was asleep, Karen would sit in the kitchen with her laptop, carefully planning their escape. She was determined to protect her daughter, but every time she looked into Emily's eyes, she saw confusion and fear. Emily was caught between loyalty to her mother and the manipulation of a man who had spent months weaving himself into her world. Richard grew more possessive in those days. He insisted on knowing where Emily was at all times, shadowed her every move, and became furious when Karen tried to spend time alone with her daughter. His obsession was no longer hidden. It was raw, unfiltered, and terrifying. Karen could feel that she was running out of time. The window to leave safely was closing fast, and she needed to act before he discovered her plans. The breaking point came on a stormy night. Rain lashed against the windows, and thunder rattled the walls. Karen had finally decided to tell Richard she was leaving. She knew it was risky, but she could no longer live in silence, waiting for him to make the next move. She waited until Emily was in her room, then confronted him in the living room. Her voice shook, but her words were steady. She wanted him out of the house, and she was taking Emily with her. Richard's face twisted with rage. His calm, charming mask dissolved completely, revealing a man consumed by desperation. He shouted that she had no right to tear apart the family, no right to take Emily away. Karen stood her ground, her anger boiling over, but before she could react, Richard lunged. He struck her, the force knocking her backward, and then his hands were around her throat. Karen fought, clawing at him, but his strength overpowered her. Emily, hearing the commotion, rushed into the room and screamed for him to stop. The sound only fueled his fury. In a frenzy, Richard grabbed a nearby object, a heavy metal lamp, and brought it down with brutal force. The impact silenced Karen instantly. The storm outside raged on, but inside the house, an even darker storm had erupted. Emily was left frozen, staring at the lifeless body of her mother on the floor. Richard's chest heaved as he stood over Karen. The man who once promised love and stability had transformed into a killer in the space of minutes. Emily, trembling, realized she was now trapped in a nightmare with no escape. Alone in the house with the very man who had destroyed everything. Richard stood frozen, the storm outside echoing the chaos inside the house. Karen's body lay motionless on the floor, and for a brief moment, silence filled the room, except for the sound of rain pounding against the windows. Emily's scream broke that silence, piercing through the night. She stared at her mother, unable to process what had just happened, her body trembling uncontrollably. Richard turned to her, his expression no longer that of a husband or stepfather, but of a man consumed entirely by his obsession and fear of losing control. He spoke quickly, his words frantic and desperate, telling Emily they had no choice but to hide what happened. He insisted that if anyone found out, their lives would be destroyed. He begged her to help him, framing it as the only way forward, as if the gruesome murder of her mother could be erased with a simple lie. Emily's mind spun in terror, caught between grief and shock. The man who had stolen her trust and twisted her emotions was now asking her to become his accomplice. Emily backed away, her heart pounding so hard she could barely hear his words. Her instincts screamed at her to run, to escape before his anger turned on her. When Richard stepped toward her, she bolted. She raced through the hallway, yanked the front door open, and ran barefoot into the storm. The rain soaked her instantly, but she didn't stop. She sprinted across the yard, pounding on a neighbor's door with all her strength, sobbing for help. The neighbor, startled by the sight of the terrified girl, quickly ushered her inside and called the police. Within minutes, sirens cut through the storm. Officers arrived at the house to find Richard still inside, his hands and shirt stained with Karen's blood. He made no attempt to flee, standing over the body, as though paralyzed by the reality of what he had done. He was taken into custody on the spot. The trial that followed gripped the community. The details that came to light shocked even the most seasoned investigators. The messages between Richard and Emily painted a disturbing picture of manipulation and control. Prosecutors revealed how he had slowly groomed her, isolating her from her mother and weaving his obsession into her daily life. Witnesses spoke about the family's outward appearance of normalcy, contrasting it with the horrors hidden behind closed doors. Emily, though devastated, found the courage to testify. Her words were halting, filled with emotion, but they carried the undeniable truth of what she had endured. She described the confusion, the secrecy, and finally the terror of watching her mother die at the hands of the man who claimed to love them both. Her testimony became the turning point of the case, leaving no room for doubt about Richard's guilt. The jury deliberated for only a short time before returning with a guilty verdict. Richard was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He sat expressionless as the sentence was read, a hollow shell of the man he once pretended to be. Emily's life was forever scarred. She lost her mother, her protector, and was forced to confront the betrayal of the man who had manipulated her so deeply. Yet in her bravery to escape and speak the truth, she ensured justice was served. Karen's tragic death became more than a story of betrayal and obsession. It became a grim reminder that even in the most ordinary of homes, darkness can take root and destroy everything in its path.